Hello, everybody, and welcome to Future Left Podcast, where we talk about all things future and all things, that's right, left. You can follow us.
Fantastic.
You can follow us on. Thank you. You can follow us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter at future_left. We're also on LinkedIn, SoundCloud, Etsy, Grinder.
We are not on Etsy or Grinder.
We don't sell anything. You can also
Selling
follow
that
our
ass.
newsletter. you can you can subscribe to our newsletter at futureleft.org. Today we're joined by co-host Adam Simpson. We're also
Hi.
joined by Future Left co-founders Michael Andreas Alinovich Bufano. Say hi,
That's
Mike.
not my name, Casey.
You're right. It's not. It's Michael Bufano. And I think we have Justine Khanzadian today. Justine, are you there?
Yes, hi everybody.
Yeah. No, but last week our debut podcast, Justine was not with us. We weren't able to introduce Justine in the world. Justine,
Yes.
tell us about yourself and what you do here at Future Left.
My focus at Future Left is sustainability. I do the sustainability section. Currently, I work with developing sustainable businesses, usually startups, and I live in Washington, D.C., and I'm Adam's neighbor.
She sure is.
Yay.
With that, we're gonna move directly into the bleeding edge news chat. Casey, why don't you start us off there?
Okay, so as everybody may or may not know, the Bleeding Edge is our newsletter that we send out twice weekly. So, Adam, what was your favorite story of the week?
My favorite story of the week. I had a lot of favorite stories of the week, actually. Let's see. I really like I like all stories with robots. I really enjoyed the robot farm with like the self-driving tractor and the guy with his iPad and stuff. I thought that was
Sure.
pretty good. That one was Alley Watch. That's the people who put that out. But I think my favorite story of the week was probably about TTIP and the leak that sunk the ship, or allegedly the European commissioner of the Trade Commission or whatever. Who cares? I forget his weird European name, but he thinks the deal is dead, and it may just be. I don't know. What did you guys think about this story? All right, so the leak that may have brought this bad bitch down was basically the U.S. Negotiating position that some would say compromised the environmental regulations in the EU. That basically they should not take precedence over the business aspect of the deal, and that really rubbed people the wrong way. I've actually seen defenses of this being like, "Hey guys, it's just the negotiating position. It's not the final deal. So calm down." But in my mind, why is it the negotiating position? Mike, I think you had something to say about this.
Oh, this displays a lot of the problems with a lot of these free trade agreements. They place so much of an emphasis on maximizing economic efficiency that they neglect the political, social, and environmental aspects that these deals can affect. And I think the problem is the European Union. They have stricter standards when it comes to their food, when it comes to the quotas in terms of what they can bring into the EU. There's more restrictions there.
And their labor practices. They have a much stronger organized labor system that may have been compromised here. Casey, what was your favorite story this week?
Well, the article I thought was most interesting was one that sort of has it was from my section, which is usually more social stuff, but it has technology implications as well, and it was the one about the smart guns, and it was asking if smart guns could possibly be a solution to our gun problems.
Yeah,
So
I don't know
basically-
about that one. Now, this would be a good conversation, actually. The thing about this, and part of it is our country's policy or our mindset on guns, but it's a very kind of a social thing. You go to the range and you share a gun with your buddy and you shoot at hay barrels or bales of hay, you know. So
Sure.
I just don't know that it'll take off. Is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, there is definitely a social component where we do have a gun culture. It's something that people make hobbies out of, as if it's a toy or a pastime. But it's always struck me as a very serious thing to take so lightly. That you have people that collect hundreds of guns and they quote unquote love guns, and it seems like that's sort of a dangerous mindset that we have. And I know in a lot of parts it's linked with ideas of manhood, and especially in the South. Me and Adam are from the South. You'll have people saying things like, "Well, every young boy should be taught by his dad how to shoot a gun." The main idea of it is that it will prevent children from getting access to their parents' guns and killing themselves or killing another child. But I also think it has implications for law enforcement as well. Where in a scuffle, someone wouldn't be able to take a cop's gun and use it against him, and if someone had a gun for home defense, somebody wouldn't be able to sneak in the house and take it and use it against them. The company's called Armatics, and they have a gun that's implanted with an electronic chip that allows it to only be fired if the shooter is wearing a watch that communicates with it through radio signals. Now
I saw that in Judge Dredd. You guys remember that?
Was it something that was on the wrist?
No, it had nothing to do with a watch.
It's a fingerprint. It's a fingerprint.
I can see the problem with that, though, right? Let's say if you buy a gun to defend your home, right? And you're up at the middle of the night, and you get up. I mean, do you have to program it first before you could pick it up and shoot it?
You got to make sure you're wearing your smartwatch that makes your gun work.
Well, what I would think is that at some point the move would be to have like fingerprint recognition or something like that, because that doesn't seem as practical. But I think right now the home defense thing isn't what they're going for. They're going more for they're having
toddlers, the scourge of toddlers. I hear toddlers have killed 23 people this year so far.
That's incredible. Now, just the amount.
That's true.
More people have died at the hands of children than terrorists in the United States over the last year.
When did toddlers become so dangerous?
I know. And what are we going to? And when are we? We need to crack down on toddlers. Is all I'm saying.
We need to have a Guantanamo Bay.
We need to register all toddlers.
Have you guys actually shot guns before? I mean, I'm only assuming because you're from Texas.
My kin is from Gun Barrel City, Texas.
I figured. Okay, Casey, have you shot a gun before?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I agree with you.
No one in particular, right, Casey?
Just Adam.
No, just randomly into a crowd.
Good God.
Good. Okay. So we're all on the same page. I went to a shooting range, and I actually did have to learn how to do this. And I have to be honest with you guys, it's actually not that easy. It's actually and they have training courses and everything for this. So I can actually understand how there can be so many accidents.
What you've got to imagine you're a toddler and you've been told you have a timeout, and that frustrates you. So what you do is you grab a gun. Now, I guess for me, in my opinion, like guns are not hard to use. You just point it at a thing you don't like particularly, maybe, or maybe something.
They're hard to aim it and shoot it at something specific, but it's not.
It's hard to be good at it, but it's not a complex device.
The problem is toddlers aren't trying to shoot people. The thing is, they're accidentally shooting people.
Right. It's totally an accident, which is why I think the software that they're proposing, or the technology that they're proposing, I actually think it could be useful. I think maybe they need to work some bugs out of it, but I actually don't think it's a terrible idea. I think.
Well, they're having federal law enforcement right now test it out, and so I think the thing with the watch and everything, I'm not sure about this, but that might just be a beta form. But I would imagine that it would be streamlined considerably. I
know I'm a girl, but I sleep with my jewelry on. I mean, I have one ring that I wear, but
in case you have to flee in the middle of the night.
Not a ring that Michael gave me, by the way. But
I'm still saving up for it. Give me about another 6 months.
It's okay. I don't want any blood diamonds. It's cool. I just
Don Cheadle.
It's just all Africa to you. Egypt, Sierra Leone.
Yeah.
Same
For the record, Don Cheadle was not in the movie Blood Diamond. Just saying that. Just putting that out there.
But if I'm wearing I don't take my jewelry off to go to bed, so I wear it in the shower. Obviously, a watch would have to be waterproof and all that, but I know a lot of people that sleep with their watches and their jewelry on, so I don't think it's actually as complicated as you guys are thinking that it might be. This could be a sustainable solution to protect people from their toddlers.
Mike, what was your favorite story this week?
The story that really interested me the most was an article I read about water shortage throughout the world and how this causes conflict. And strangely enough, it reminded me of this comment that the that moron Bill Maher made about violence in the Middle East. One of the groups he was talking,
You guys don't badmouth Bill Maher. He's giving out solutions to our problems for free.
Yes.
Okay?
For free.
Yes, for free. Yes, he was talking about groups like El Shabaab, Boko Haram, and El Shabaab. This is a terrorist group that's located in Somalia, and you know nothing about global politics or sub-Saharan Africa or the Middle East. You would think that, oh, this group is going around killing people because Islam is telling them to do this. But when I look at the problems in Somalia, one of the big issues you see is water shortage. One of the things they're fighting over is over land, over territory, in particular over water resources. Because over the last couple of decades, Somalia has grown drier, they have less water resources, and because of pollution off their coastal waters, a lot of ships right before they go into the Suez Canal, they like to dump their waste off the Somali coast because Somalia doesn't have a real coast guard.
You know, Mike, this story actually plays really well to the topic we're actually discussing for the bulk of our podcast this week. I actually wanted to start off the section with it, so I'll elaborate a little bit more. But we're talking this week about climate change pessimism, which I think gets us all every now and then. But basically what I'm talking about is, climate change being one of the key issues to our future is something that concerns us a lot. And this has been a pretty depressing month for climate watchers. We've had there was wildfires in Canada. 80,000 Canadians were forced to evacuate wildfires that were exacerbated by temperatures that were 20 degrees above normal, also exacerbated by a weak winter. New findings from Germany's Max Planck Institute for Chemistry and Cyprus Institute say that parts of the Middle East could soon become uninhabitable. A new World Bank report also looking at the water shortages, even without dramatic action, from the Sahel all the way through most of the Middle East, all the way to Iran, I believe, could face severe water shortages. And if we don't do anything, that it could be spread to sub-Saharan Africa and also most of Asia, including China, even including Japan. In Central Asia.
Adam, when you look at like the causes of the Syrian civil war, a lot of farmers prior to 2011, they lost their land because of water shortages, and many of them flooded to the suburbs of Damascus.
Sure.
It's in the suburb of Dara, on the outskirts of Damascus, where the revolution started. You had a lot of unemployed former farmers who did not have jobs, who had problems with housing. So this is a serious issue. When you think water shortages, people don't often think political conflict. But if people don't have enough water, obviously, you're going to have a struggle over resources. And in poor countries like Syria, this could turn into political conflict.
Another story this week, the Washington Post detailed the potential of climate change to begin depleting large parts of the oxygen in the ocean, which could kill sea life. It's all bad news. And this is an older story, but Vox editor Ezra Klein wrote in 2014, "I'm a climate pessimist. I don't believe the United States or the world would do nearly fast enough to hold these temperatures, these rise in temperatures, to safe levels. I think we're fucked." That's a direct quote. Or at least I think our grandchildren are fucked. Wise, eloquent words from the editor of Vox. But just in general, how do you feel about these pessimistic arguments with regard to climate change? Justine, why don't you go ahead?
I'm not having children, so they're not fucked.
Well.
Sorry, Mike. We're not having children. We can adopt.
Could always adopt.
Yeah, we can always adopt. Okay. So I actually...
so your adopted children are fucked.
Yeah, basically. We're just going to adopt them much older.
But they're not the real children, so who cares?
Yeah. So... theoretical children. So I actually did in the newsletter. I think I linked to an article that had a kind of a more positive outlook on this. They were actually giving an award for companies that were able to solve a problem when it came to climate change, and the winner was actually a company that was cleaning up the ocean. The winning company was actually making a big dent in cleaning up our oceans, and it's something that we could actually implement in the future. So it's not that there isn't, and this is just an example, that it's not that there aren't solutions. This person saying that everybody is screwed.
Fucked.
Sorry, that everybody is fucked. That's
Whoa.
That's not where we go. I mean, we have to come up with a solution. We can't just say, "Oh, sorry," throw our hands in the air like our children are fucked, whatever. People that come up with these solutions are actually able to do it and turn it into a business.
And one response to Ezra Klein that was again, this was a few years ago. They wrote this really pessimistic article was by Brenton Mock over at grist.org, who basically pointed out that saying that we're all fucked is basically saying that the people who are going to be most impacted by climate change, predominantly in the developed world, are not worth trying to save, which I think is a really strong argument. Of course, the rise in sea levels is going to impact coastal communities in the United States, but being that the United States and other developed countries use more carbon and put out more emissions than any of the developing world for now, which that might not be true if we don't move more towards sustainable forms of development. But right now, the biggest culprit for climate change is the developed world. So it's kind of I don't know, kicking the can not just down the road, but also at people who are not responsible for this crisis.
A lot of the pollution in India comes not from industry, but from the poor who have to use things like cow dung for fuel and coal.
A lot of the conversation that I want to orient this towards solutions as an antidote for pessimism. In terms of the U.S. energy breakdown, 33% comes from coal, 33% from natural gas, 6% from hydro, 1% from petrol, 20% from nuclear, and 7% from other renewables, with solar at a tenth of a decimal, and wind at 4.7%, which is larger than I would have thought. But in terms of we're all of us here are Americans. What are the solutions that America can do to reduce its carbon footprint and really begin confronting climate change?
One of the things we have to do is we have to begin to cut fuel subsidies. Right now, it's absurd, just the general amount of subsidies that still go to fossil fuels, despite the fact that this is an industry that's over a century old. It's very profitable. ExxonMobil didn't have a problem earning profits last quarter, yet they're getting, every year, tens of millions of dollars in subsidies. This needs to be cut, and we need to increase the subsidies to the alternatives, and we have to take away laws that create roadblocks for people to, put solar panels on their homes. There's some states, believe it or not, where they have a lot of laws that make it difficult for people to make use of alternative technologies.
And this is all actually really teeing up really well a forthcoming article from Mike Bufano that will come out this week on the 12th of May. And also brings me to a point I wanted to raise about specifically ExxonMobil. The New York Times had a story this week about ExxonMobil investing, didn't say how much they were investing, but investing in a carbon capture startup, or rather, just in general, carbon capture technology. The CEO, he says that it could reduce emissions by 90% for petrol, for natural gas, for coal, and stuff like that. My problem with this, I guess, is it's kind of like letting tobacco companies take the lead on anti-smoking and smoking research. But what do you guys think about this carbon capture technology?
I think that they created the problem, kind of, and maybe they should be responsible for fixing it. I don't think that they should do it on their own. I think that we do need to have oversight. They should take the path that Berkshire Hathaway, that's Buffett's company, has been taking, which is to start investing some of your profits into wind energy, alternative energy, because these companies are so large, because our mutual funds are all tied into them, our pension plans. It seems like the best way for reform is for these very same companies to begin to slowly transition to alternative energy. The only problem with this, and Adam, I think, mentioned this during the last podcast, do we have enough time to pussyfoot around? I think I just used the word pussyfoot.
Mike.
It's the time to just,
It's 2016, Mike.
Yeah, okay, well, exactly.
We got to be pussyfoot forward.
Just sit around and slowly reform to deal with this problem. We have to deal with this right away. And so I don't know if we could take this slow approach where we're just gradually making this transition.
Should we be focused on confronting climate change, or should we be focused on kind of preparing for it? I think the answer is basically a little bit of both. But I'll let you guys all chime in on that before I move on.
I think preparation, as opposed to fixing, is basically leading to Mad Max.
Just to give people an idea of what climate change is going to do, almost all the world's major cities are located on the coasts. If you have rising sea levels, that means we have to move every major metropolis inland. the expenses of that to the infrastructure, the costs of that would be enormous. It would be immense.
And again, the first world can afford something like that, but the developing world, it's going to be a lot more difficult for them to do. Justine, I think you wanted to get in
So
here.
what we should be doing is we should be trying to make these changes as quickly as possible. And probably the fastest way to do that, and unfortunately, is going to have these big companies invest in fixing in it. And the more money we put in it, the more research we can do, the faster we can find a solution.
But I also want to talk about a carbon tax. That seems like a direct way. And actually, it's an interesting. I just saw this article today. But Elon Musk is all about a carbon tax, and Elon Musk being a fancy. It's basically our version of Batman in the real world. Yeah, Elon Musk has basically said that these are his exact words. We need to appeal to the people and educate them to sort of revolt against this being basically big oil and the oil lobby to fight the propaganda of the fossil fuel industry, which is unrelenting and enormous. He was this story was in the Guardian. I do recommend it because I do completely agree with it. But a carbon tax has been ridiculed for a lot of reasons. But how do you guys feel about overall the notion of a carbon tax?
It's going to be shot down as anti-business. I mean that's the biggest thing is it's going to be called anti-business, anti-industry, and I don't know how we're going to. Again, there's too much. Money from these industries within the political system. So it's going to have to be a change in our political culture, which is
I think it
a
takes
long way away.
leadership. But in my mind, we're talking about anti-business versus anti, the future of humanity, which is
right. But those arguments are made now, and they're not compelling to anyone because of money.
Yeah. On that note, I also have some stats here on American perception of global warming. 64% say they worry a great deal about it, about climate change. 36% say a little or not at all. Oddly enough, 41% say climate change is a serious threat. Which I thought was kind of at odds with each other. They worry about it a great deal, but not as many people say it's a huge threat. But most people, more than ever, it's actually been coming around recently. The public opinion is moving more toward belief in the science behind climate change, and also in the anthropogenic causes of climate change.
I think we talked a little bit about this in the last podcast, but a lot of the problem is that we don't have a lot of the scientists working directly with the policymakers.
I know research and scientists have gone before policymakers formally, and it's they always get paid lip service of recognition, but ultimately it gets ignored.
I think the steps are there. I mean, Adam mentioned one of them, the carbon tax. We have to create disincentives for continued investment into shale oil resources, into fossil fuels, and the only way you're going to do that is by creating disincentives to continue to invest in this industry and create incentives to invest in clean energy. Casey's right in that there's a lot of fossil fuel money within politics. Part of what my article is going to discuss next week is how fossil fuel companies like ExxonMobil are able to use campaign financing to pay for the campaigns of politicians, and in turn they could get subsidies out of it. This is something that needs to change, but I don't think we should be pessimistic about it. Things can eventually change if there's enough political pressure, and if you get the word out enough, you can change the political system.
Let me just jump in here. With regard to the carbon tax, it would make fuel prices go up. What frustrates me is that we talk about a carbon tax. Should people pay more for their oil, which may incentivize them to move toward electric cars or putting solar on the roof or whatever. But at the end of the day, most oil companies don't pay any tax, or they pay very little with regard to the huge subsidies they get from the government directly to these corporations. So my problem, I guess, with the carbon tax is that it would target users, which I think is actually part of the solution, but I don't think we should target users without targeting these big corporations.
One of the big things is that the American citizens need to be we need to become more aware of our ability to influence policy through action, I think that in our giant complex political system, I think we actually forget that we have the ability to put political pressure on policymakers.
Casey, what kind of car do you drive? Casey,
I drive a 2007 Dodge Charger.
Jesus.
It's an obnoxious muscle car. I didn't
Why?
buy it.
First
It was
of all, he
it
didn't
was
buy
it was
it. Yeah, it was handed down.
it was handed down to me because my
Okay,
my
hand-me-downs. Okay,
grandmother's
that's
husband died.
okay.
Yeah, so thanks for bringing that up.
Sorry.
No, it's
Yeah.
okay. But I say this all the time. I'll say it again here. Don't hate the player, hate the game. I always say that, and I think that's part of the problem
You
here.
do always say that.
Is there's a system in place that we incentivize these companies for the sake of business, perhaps, sure, but they're also lobbying for these subsidies. So should we hate the player or should we hate the game? I mean, I blame politicians, frankly, more than I blame these corporations, I have to say.
That means that we do need to put pressure on them, right?
Yeah.
So moving forward, maybe that means that we don't buy Dodge Chargers.
He didn't buy it. But anyway.
I
Well,
I agree.
there's a lot of other things
agree.
we need to start encouraging. I mean, it's not just the cars we're driving; it's where we're living. Sustainable city life. We have to start changing the way we think about living in cities, and people don't want to hear this. And I often hear from people, "Oh, but this is just the government getting in the way, telling us where we could live." But I've got to tell you something. Ever since 1938, the government has been telling us to live in suburbs. So it's not a matter of going from small government to big government. It's a matter of shifting big government, going from this policy of building infrastructure in the suburbs to one where we build infrastructure in cities and we redirect people to urban centers.
The cities, they're predominantly on coastal terrain. They're the ones that are going to be hit by this the hardest. So, in my mind, if your city's either sustainable or, as the great philosopher Maynard James Keenan once said, learn to swim. You know what I mean?
Which I happen to be a
Indeed.
lifeguard. But that might mean
So
that
you've got a vested interest
I
in,
do have
in
a
global
vested
warming.
interest in this. If that might mean that the currently suburbs, maybe they need to develop into cities that are more urban.
But isn't that what's happening? I feel like that's ultimately what we're moving to. Like, I think urban areas are growing outward, and I think that's just part of progress. And I would imagine that.
But it
that
needs
eventually
to happen faster.
Right, but beyond that, we also have to think about, in terms of cities, they produce a lot more waste. We don't have an effective waste management. We take all our trash, we pour it in a landfill, and then as it decomposes, all the methane goes into the atmosphere. Methane being, let me look, the global data I have. Methane accounts for 16% of all greenhouse gases. 16, and not all of that is from waste. Some of that, as I always say, is from cow farts. Frankly, we have this obsession with actually being in the same space. Here at Future Left, none of us are in the same space except for me and Justine right now, which is rare. But you can really operate a lot of businesses, I think, remotely. Not all service related businesses, and certainly that's not true of everything.
But the problem is, Adam, is with transport. When you're transporting finished goods from factories,
Sure.
people are dispersed. The purchasing power parity goes up. What does that mean in short? It means the cost of all the goods goes up, because you have to transport them for longer distances.
Until we
If
all
people
have
live in
3D
concentrated
printers,
areas,
we get that.
it's cheaper to transport, and it's cheaper to build public transportation networks. People could take the metro to work. They can.
But transport can be run on renewables. Eventually, that's where this will go, right? Like, we will be able to have transportation run on renewables.
What order are things going to have to change in? Because obviously things with
I don't
energy
believe we should make this into a sequential thing. I think we have to.
Well,
do
because
this all
energy
at once,
isn't,
really.
but because isn't energy consumption isn't the way we consume energy going to have to change before we start changing the way infrastructure runs?
There was an article we had in the Bleeding Edge called. It was about getting America to 100% renewables. But basically, if you look at the graph they had a projected line for U.S. energy consumption, and they showed how that needed to go down. That was a big part of getting to 100% renewables. So but in my mind, we do have some nuclear power. Nuclear power is getting cleaner and safer. Everyone talks about Fukushima when you talk about nuclear power, and it accounts for about 20% of U.S. Domestic energy.
Yeah, actually, there was an article in Forbes a few weeks ago. I put it in the newsletter that nuclear energy actually will become renewable, and it will be because we're getting uranium a different way, which will be from seawater.
Now, Justine, I've played Fallout. We all know where this is going to go. We're going to have
only me and Casey know about Fallout, but Fallout is a game about a nuclear holocaust. The problem with nuclear power, in my mind, is that if we really want to invest in it and build more nuclear power plants, we're talking about decades away. It takes a lot of time and a lot of carbon-intensive resources right now to build such a plant in a safe and sustainable way. The main way we start making a dent in our carbon footprint is by advocating sustainables right now. Eventually, we can have nuclear power for when those downtimes when renewables aren't as good, like when the sun goes down and your solar panels aren't chipping into the grid.
Are we going to have to choose what sources of renewable energy we go with, or are we going to be able to do all at once? Because isn't it going to change? Isn't it going to change?
On where you live.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
like out on the plains and stuff like that, you would want to use wind energy and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think that we can all agree that having more than one renewable energy is going to be the best way to go.
On the article that we read, right, there's they talk about how each of the 50 states, they develop different plans for each of the states, depending on whether you're coastal, whether you're inland. That'll change the nature of the type of alternatives you use, and there'll be usually a general mix of different types of alternatives depending on what town you live in and what city you live in.
Is there going to be any problem with how those systems interact with each other, or will they be their own discrete systems, or does anyone see? I mean, I don't know. I don't, like, if we're all using, if there's different systems depending on region, is there any complications anyone could imagine arising from that?
Well, I mean, part of what we could do is better integrate our grids. That way, if wind power in wherever we're getting wind from, whether it's the Northeast or the Midwest or wherever, it would contribute to a broader grid. Solar fields in the southwestern part of the United States could support more. Like again, keep up bringing up Elon Musk, but Tesla released a video about how much solar it would take to power the United States. It doesn't mention in the video that the sun goes down and then we still use energy, but the peak hours for energy use is during the day. So if we integrated our grid more efficiently and more effectively, solar could really make a dent.
Could we? So instead of a lot of places you drive around the United States and you see these little chain link fenced off areas that have the local sort of power hub. Are we going to look at a revamping of that system where now they are storage units storing the collected wind or solar energy?
I just read this article that from Massachusetts. A lot of towns now, they're starting to engage in these collectives for solar, where the entire community will get in on the project itself. To invest in the technology. I don't know much about these collectives. Maybe one of you can talk about them in more detail.
I don't know specifically about the one in Massachusetts, but energy cooperatives are really it's not as rare as you'd think. In a lot of more rural areas, the energy cooperatives are much more common because the very big energy companies don't have as much incentive to operate out there, so local cooperatives form in order to supply power to the community. And I think that's really would be a great way for to kind of decentralize that. I mean, I mentioned earlier that ExxonMobil is talking about carbon capture, but at the end of the day, solar is free, and I think that's ExxonMobil's biggest problem with renewables. Is if I put a solar panel on my house, I'm completely avoiding energy companies.
This might sound crazy, but what if it was just free and the labor that it takes to keep up the infrastructure was paid for just like it is for the highways, right? Isn't that paid for by our taxes?
If I go out and buy a solar panel, for my house, what I could do is when I'm filing for my taxes, I could write that off on my taxes and I could get a big tax break. And I know some states are already doing that, and that's something that needs to be encouraged more. Other states are not. In fact, some states are doing the opposite, where they're discouraging it. And even if you don't use the energy from the power company, your solar panels are really efficient. The energy companies won't send you a check in the mail because you are giving money back to the grid. So we really need to start encouraging people to not only put these on their homes, but energy companies should be giving people money back if they're contributing to the grid. The state has to step in and they have to choose who are they going to support.
Just the typical ways the state has of persuading and incentivizing certain behaviors and disincentivizing other behaviors. The article in Vox about 100% renewables, it specifically mentioned a World War II scale project, a development project, to get us toward a more sustainable and renewable future, which I think is is really the what we need. I would be all for that. I mean, we've rallied national resources to meet specific threats. And as big as World War II was, I think climate change is a threat far beyond that scale.
Well, we've done it before, Adam. When you think of the New Deal back in the 1930s, think of like the Tennessee Valley Authority, when FDR was able to of course build dams and provide energy by hydroelectric power.
One of the biggest problems, I think, is that companies want the energy industry to remain privatized, and it just can't.
Yeah, exactly. Because solar, in a sense, you buy the solar panel, but after a while, you're not chipping in you're not kicking up to Pacific Gas and Electric or Pepco or whoever your energy provider are.
So energy companies, even though they may be offering greener energy solutions here in the future, ultimately they won't have a long-term vested interest in this, because it'll make the users more independent, won't it?
Exactly, which means that eventually this is not going to be privatized anymore. That's everybody's biggest fear, right? Is every company
is it something may not be profitable? That's the biggest worry.
Unfortunately for them is inevitable. I'm sorry, but you've made money for long enough at this point.
Absolutely.
It's not going to be privatized anymore, because that's how we're going to solve this problem. We have to solve the problem. So this is one of the ways that it's going to happen. So you're going to have to figure something out for yourself. Like, we can't be responsible for you're a business person. Figure it out.
We've got to stop. In this country, we've got to stop saying, the planet's dying, but what about the poor businessmen? Think about the poor millionaires.
It's pretty ridiculous. And I think I want to close the loop on this section and move on to something else. But just to bring this back to our electorate and this crazy election season, more polling on climate data. Most Republican, with regard to human activity as the cause of climate change, Democrats, 85% of Democrats believe this. 68% of independents believe this. Anyone want to take a guess at how many Republicans believe this? Zero? Come on.
I'm guessing 25%.
How much, Mike?
25%.
We're playing Price is Right rules. Casey, you want to get in on this?
24%.
1%, Adam.
Okay, Casey, you don't understand Price is Right, so you just lost. But
I did it back. I
you had to say 26%, bro.
Yeah, exactly. But no.
I did it. I did it on
38%.
I did it on purpose as a joke.
Yeah, 38%
What do I
of
win, Adam?
Republicans. You win nothing. Part of the thing about this election season, right now, I'm still holding out for Bernie, for perhaps kind of tilting at windmills at this point, barring a major catastrophe. And then the Republicans have decided on he who shall not be named. But
Voldemort.
This character, he believes that global warming and climate change is a Chinese conspiracy to ruin American business.
He says he believes this. I don't know if he believes it.
Well, regardless, I don't trust such a man to
Sure.
make policy on the matter. I want to move on to the article we featured in Future Left this week. Was written by some schmuck. I don't know who it was.
It was written by you.
It was written by me. And
You silly goose.
It was called "Big Ideas Need Big Government."
So
I don't call it government. I call it
title,
government.
By the way, bad timing when we have the possibly Republican nominee being you know who.
You know who?
Because I'm
Who?
not sure. I don't want big government doing anything if he ends up in the White House. But we're gonna hope that doesn't happen.
I get sick of hearing this from the Republican politicians. George Orwell once said, if you told a lie enough, it becomes true. This idea that the Republicans over the last 40 years have been promoting small government is, I'm sorry, it's a load of bullshit. It really is. When you look at the numbers, it just does not add up. So,
I think we should
for example,
give Descartes a little credit there. I mean, their truth is their
I
truth,
refuse to give Rene Descartes any credit.
But getting into the article, basically, I wrote it kind of because I hate this libertarian mindset, and I used Rand Paul's stupid shenanigans. His words. He said, "I want a government so small you can barely see it," and from there is where I kind of take it. But there's also Ted Cruz has kind of parroted Reagan when he said government is not the solution to our problem.
Right.
The argument is that we should let business solve everything, but the problem is, first of all, that business is not interested in social good; it is interested in profit.
But that's not
Some
even
businesses
that.
are
But look,
but
listen
that's
here with
not-
that premise. This idea that we've had unaltered free markets over the last 40 years, it just reality does not match it.
Sure. No, of course.
But
It's so
there are now
interconnected in the
businesses,
government.
But Mike, there are now a lot of businesses that are changing that, right? Because the answer to that is are businesses that have social responsibility, right? So I'm not saying, listen, there has to be a balance. There is no small government, you can barely see it. That's not a thing, because when it comes to infrastructure and big problems and things like renewable energy, like we need to be voting for people that are going to be solving these problems.
No company or individual will ever have the resources that a government can either has or can put together.
What I mean is BS. Look, these guys, they claim that we can't engage in energy reform because this would require big government. We can't switch to sustainable cities because this would require big government. But over the last 40 years, when you think about suburbanization, when you think about our oil industry, shale oil, for example, this has required big government support in the form of infrastructure, subsidies to oil companies. Under George W. Bush, the deficit went up. Under Ronald Reagan, the deficit went up by 6 times. So this idea that these guys are going around promoting this idea that we can't engage in these policies because it would involve big government, it's nonsense. It's merely shifting big government from doing one thing to doing another.
I think, Mike, you're making a good point here that the government, it isn't about the size of the government. It's about what the government is doing. It's about the job.
Yeah,
of
it's
the
not
government.
about size; it's how you use it. And I actually do think that a public-private partnership is in order for a lot of these problems. The problem is part of that partnership requires government action, and it requires
a lot
vision.
of P's.
That's what I kept referring to in my piece is about vision, and that's something that I don't think most politicians have because their vision extends to re-election.
So we need
I don't know that they
better
articulate.
government, not bigger government.
Well,
No, that's certainly true. I think we do.
I think maybe not even, and I think in the future it may not be government. It may actually. I know we just made the argument that it's going to have to be government, but I think we need more people going into business who wouldn't otherwise go into business, because normally when people go into business, it's because they're ambitious, they're looking to make a lot of money. But there's a lot of people who are, let's say, more altruistic, more concerned with, issues of justice and fair working conditions and renewable energy. And a lot of these people aren't going to be going into business. But isn't that also what we need? Don't we need people who would otherwise be activists? Don't we need them? Doesn't there need to be a change in our culture or some sort of campaign of getting these people to start businesses?
I think
Absolutely.
you're right,
Elon
and I
Musk,
think-
right, is a big part of that.
Yes,
right?
yes,
So-
he's a good example of that. Like, because businesses aren't going to businesses that exist and that have been just bottom line like Exxon. These things, those companies aren't going to change.
But new businesses can actually start from
right, and we need
day
more of
one.
that, is what I'm saying. Yes,
yeah, being
yes,
socially
exactly.
responsible.
But,
Yes.
yeah. I mean, I guess in the article, the things I spelled out were specifically a reference to climate change. I don't trust, just leaving it to businesses to change themselves. I think that's why I think I'm persuaded by a carbon tax, is because that's a direct incentive to move toward renewable energy. And other subsidies, and frankly removing the subsidies we have on oil, just to lower consumption rates. I think that's really important. The other thing I pointed to in my article was about infrastructure, about high-speed rail, and which in terms of its carbon footprint, it really depends on how you do it. There's really kind of horrific in terms of carbon footprint forms of high-speed rail, but the amount of jobs that we create is pretty substantial. And really, the argument against it, like it being a government program or a government initiative, is that it would cost a lot. And the main line I drew to this is that corporate tax avoidance, it's not evasion. Our laws allow them to do this, allow them to basically either pay no taxes and store their money overseas by saying, well, even though all of our operations or most of our operations are in America, our headquarters is based out of Ireland because they don't really charge us any money, so we don't have to pay taxes.
And it's not just what's amazing, Adam. It's not just overseas. There's some states in America like New Jersey, Texas, where there might be no state income tax, where companies can actually dodge taxes just by staying in the United States.
I think it should be talked about more, how this can appeal to people who are just concerned with bottom line profit, because there are still going to be those people, and if they aren't convinced that this is going to benefit them, then it's still going to meet a lot of resistance. And I know that I personally don't think that in every situation we should emphasize profit. I think that should be de-emphasized a lot in our culture, because I think it creates a lot of problems. But if people want to know that there is going to be that, and they will get on board, people who only care about money, then I think we should just talk more about that, because I think a lot of people think that they're going to be losing money on this. But Justine makes a lot of good points.
But I have a lot of student loans, so I definitely want to be making money, and hopefully
Absolutely.
a lot of it quickly to pay them off. But
Absolutely.
But I understand your
But
general
Justine,
point.
that's why we have to seize the means of production.
Well, I think it's
Good Lord.
it's going to involve a government-private
I
partnership.
wish everyone
right?
saw Adam's face and how dead serious he looked.
No, I know the face. I know the face he made. I know the face he made.
Mike, I think we all know the face Adam made. I'm sorry. Eventually, we'll go to video because.
That's just what I look like.
Oh, Adam. Okay.
Adam's just a very sincere guy.
But I God, I lost.
Adam, big fan of Che Guevara.
No, I think
Yes.
Che Guevara is a murderer. But what was I talking
The
about?
reality is that some of these businesses that we're talking about are going to go out of business. I'm sorry, but that's how it's going to be. And we have to enter into a new phase of humanity where businesses are socially responsible from day one, and we have a different idea of what business is supposed to be.
But how
And
do
if
we?
people-
well,
and
Well,
if
this
we
is not
were-
this is the first time we're doing this. Think of like labor laws, right? Back in the late 19th century, it was okay to pay your worker, a few cents an hour. It was okay to have them work 15 hours a day. The culture changed. In the early 20th century, with the rise of, the labor union movement, the rise of, the left that supported these labor unions, the culture eventually did evolve. And there's no reason
it's
why.
It's interesting you bring that up with regard to labor. One of the articles I talked about in terms of the shock to global business that a transfer to renewables is akin to is the end of the slave trade, which I thought was a really interesting argument, because a lot of us, we think about slavery as an independent national issue, but of
I think
course
it was
there
bad.
This massive, there was this
Oh,
massive.
the British with the abolitionist movement. They sent their navy throughout the globe to enforce the end of the slave trade. So it was definitely a global initiative
but
led by.
It was a global initiative, and it was based, on social good. It doesn't occur to me at all that there was a financial incentive to this. This was about social good, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe I'm, I don't know.
No, you're right.
Here's where there is a little bit of the economic issue with becoming a mass production. It made slave labor more and more throughout time expendable.
It's a harder argument to make, though, because with slavery, it was far more blatant. And I think that's one of the biggest problems, is that over time, the injustices committed by human societies have become more subtle. So they're done with a wink. They're not done so much like just right there where people can say, hey, that's not right. There's more. You can sort of say, no, that's not what's going on. It's happening like this, and you can kind of make an argument.
I think the harder issue with this, Casey, with like global warming, for example, it's so recent. The science, climate science. 4 or 5 decades ago, this was something that would have been unthinkable. This idea that what we're burning is changing the global climate. This would have been unthinkable, and now it's only now becoming common knowledge.
Well,
so
and also,
I think people have a hard time adjusting to it as well.
And also, people. I think people nowadays, especially with the rise of the internet, have become. We're very suspicious of new things. There's a lot of conspiratorial thinking nowadays. I know people who think that global warming is a scam to get us to spend money on car inspections and emissions. So I mean, and that's definitely a direct.
Embarrassingly stupid.
Mike,
So
don't
again,
you
so
think that
again,
a few decades is enough time for us to kind of get used to this? I mean, you're kind of giving a lot of leeway here. I'm sorry, get on board. We know it's happening. Now we need to do something.
well, there's a lot that we're getting. Like, there's a lot that, especially in American society, we're getting. This isn't the only issue that we're trying to get used to. There's so much happens nowadays. There's so much change happening constantly, and that will probably only increase exponentially. That I think our ways of dealing with dealing with issues like this, we're gonna have to get better at that, because right now I feel like a lot of people.
You're no, that's just not how it's. That's just. I sound, and because I'm a woman, I'm sure everybody thinks that I'm being a bitch or boss.
No,
or
no,
You
whatever.
just need to
But
smile. Just smile, Justine.
No,
Just
the wet
smile.
wet was hilarious.
I just assumed you were going to be a
I
bitch.
just listen. You're
Whoa.
Don't talk to your wife that way.
I still love you. It's okay.
Italian husbands.
I just think that. Well, you'll pay for that later.
Wait,
So
that
I
sounds
think
sexual.
that you're giving people you're giving people too much time that we don't have to quote unquote get used to this. There are a lot of changes, and things are changing all the time. I think especially our generation is used to things changing constantly.
Yeah.
So
No, I agree.
I
now-
think
I
that's
agree.
the
Like,
problem. That's not true of other generations.
because I wouldn't want to hear someone using those things I said to give themselves an excuse for not doing it. I'm saying I think that's why it hasn't happened. But yeah, I don't think they're valid. I don't think there's any valid excuse for not wanting to take care of of any pertinent issue.
Yeah,
So I just had to
we
clarify.
Need to just like okay, you're right. Sure, people needed time to get used to it or whatever, and I'm sure they still want, but too bad. Okay, well, it's happened. I'm not going to give you time to like whine about it. We need to come up with a plan so that we can fix it and move forward.
On Facebook, we actually had a comment from a guy named Chris Breslin, and his critique was it was a 1984 kind of thing, which that's a different. Privacy is a different issue, and we should talk about that soon. I think, in my mind, privacy and secrets, both respectively for the public and for the government, is kind of on the decline, which I'm not sure how to feel about that, and we can do that further later. But one argument I wanted to talk was he mentioned decentralization, and I'm actually a big supporter of decentralization. I don't trust decentralization in this current climate of Governor Nutbag in North Carolina or Governor Stupidface in Kansas.
Yeah.
Being trusted to enact sensible policies. That's my problem with decentralization.
So you're saying that decentralization is not the next step, but a step somewhere later.
Because in our current climate, decentralization and the arguments for states' rights often mean that states that want to have racist laws should be able to do that, and that's our current climate, though. And so I know I do agree with Adam that eventually that should be so. But right now we're a child people, and we're not ready for it.
Well, I think when it comes to certain issues, certainly there should be local infrastructure, local education. Certain issues should remain at the local level, but there are certain rules that the federal government has. And one of them is to deal with national level crises that affect the entire nation.
Yeah.
Whether this deals with the military or something like climate change, this is something that crosses over the borders of states. Something like climate change doesn't just affect New York, it doesn't just affect Arizona. So I do respect federalism. The things that I love about federalism, I think it's a great ideal that each of the different states could have a different character, a different way of governing. But when a problem like this crosses over borders, this is where the government constitutionally can step in there and legislate.
It's less about states. The reason I support decentralization in theory is it requires education and empowerment of local governments, not state governments. I think state governments often are leaders in, as Casey's already pointed out, going backwards in many respects, whether it's social or economic. And that's why I don't really trust that.
But why would local governments, like, wouldn't local governments have even greater it seems to me that a state government, the reason that state governments shouldn't have complete autonomy is because a state could have a weird anomalous racist culture that doesn't match with the overall values of the country, and we should mitigate that by having the federal government be able to impose laws on them that.
To your point, you are kind of right. In certain places, local government
Mostly wrong.
but there are places. The only answer I have to this is that if more people are voting for their local government and more are voting in the local government, probably they're going to be a little bit more of they're going to be a better representation of those people, and they're going to be more familiar with everything that's going on because they're more involved in the community than people in the state government.
I agree, and I get that.
That's what I mean in terms of local school boards, local initiatives like that. And we do need to wrap up soon, but I want to let Casey and Mike get the final word on that.
Well, my only worry is that a local city could have an even greater percentage of citizens who are of messed up mindsets. Like you can have a state, like people can sort of colloquially know that Mississippi and race not so good, but I'm sure there's certain cities where that's less so, and certain cities where it's an extreme version. And those individual little townships I don't know if I'd want. It seems like the states' rights things would be amplified because it's easier for a local population where a lot of people have gathered due to a common mindset. Like I'm sure there's cities in Mississippi that are very Klan heavy. I don't know if I want them having that much local autonomy.
Let's reverse the philosophy, though. Okay, there's always the worry if you have too much local government, some local governments will make the quote-unquote wrong choices regarding social issues, economic ones. But let's reverse it. Let's say if you give the central government all the power, and then you have someone like the orange-skinned one, that should not be named, who becomes president. All of a sudden, you give someone like that an incredible amount of power, and now we're talking about the opposite problem, right? I feel like when you have that type of balance between local and central, it creates checks and balances, and it allows, like, say, if one state like Kansas recently had a failed policy where they really tried to
Brown Stack has a lot of policies, frankly.
You could see the failure there, and other states can learn from that. So I think there are good aspects to federalism there. And just a second point before I sound off here, I think by the government investing in alternative energies, this will empower local communities because now all of a sudden, people are going to be able to have solar power on their homes. They're not going to depend on the main energy grid to get most of their energy. It's ironic, but by more central government investment, you could actually have stronger local communities that could be more self-sufficient.
But I also think that a solution to this is going to be educated people voting. So better education, and then those people that are better educated going and actually voting, so that the people that are making the decisions are people that are chosen by other people that are actually informed.
It's looking more and more like that's what all roads lead to, is education. Because as Justine was saying, with a lot of the industries that are going to fall by the wayside if we invest in clean energy, these companies are going to be gone, those industries are going to be gone, those skill sets are going to be gone. And so we're going to have to revamp education to prepare people for a world without those industries. And then also, as she just mentioned, education needs to play a better part, because the media certainly isn't doing it, in educating the electorate. So it seems all roads lead to education.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great note to end. We thank you for joining us today on Future Left Podcast, and we'll be sure to follow us on Twitter, follow us on Facebook, on SoundCloud, LinkedIn, all that jazz, and be sure to send us your thoughts on what we about here today. That will talk to you next time and keep the conversation going. This is futureleft.org. My co-host Casey Rogers. Say bye, Casey.
Later, everybody.
And we're also joined today by Mike and Justine. Bye, guys.
Bye.
See you later, everybody.